It's only about 4:30. That's good. We've got time to do a lot of questions. I know you must have a lot of questions because you've been holding them now Thursday, Friday, Saturday, lots of questions. So this will be a good time to work those off. All right, we have cards back there where you're going to read questions?
Yep.
Okay.
The question, this was the question on Thursday evening after the lecture. A question concerning the notion of abstraction in philosophy. A quote from philosopher Alan Watts goes like this: "I'm amazed that congressmen can pass a bill imposing severe penalties on anyone who burns the American flag, whereas they are burning that for which the flag stands for." Or, the map is not the territory. It is to be that in our culture we confuse symbols with reality. I wonder, what value do abstractions have in your theory? Does the quote above make sense within MBT, where not biology but information is fundamental?
Would you repeat just the last part of that, just the question part? What is the question? Where does the quote above make sense with MBT, where not biology but information is fundamental? Does the sense of
that basically, the way I understand it, that in MBT, it's information that is fundamental, not biology. So does it make sense? The above quote makes sense in that context.
Okay.
This is actually my question.
Go ahead. Tell me more about it.
Let me give you the microphone.
Yes, I need the microphone. Otherwise, when this ends up on YouTube, they don't hear what you're saying.
I had a friend of mine is a philosopher, and he asked me if I go with a friend with a map into an open territory, and we look at the map, and there is a nation border. So we are standing right in front of the nation border, which is only an abstraction, but we see only flower meadows or trees. And then he asked me, is the nation state, is it fundamental? The border, is it an abstraction, or is it fundamental? And the question is, how can I say it? In an information system, the abstraction would exist in every consciousness of every human being. So the nation border does exist in every data stream because they believe in it. So I hope you can follow me.
Yeah, well, the fact that it exists and the fact that we act as if it existed, the fact that we observe that border doesn't make it fundamental. In my sense of fundamental, things that are fundamental are things that are not derived from other things. Well, a border is derived from a lot of other things. It's a product. It's not fundamental. Fundamental things are where you start. It's the starting place. It's what you start from, and then you build things. And the stuff that you build is a product. It's derived. It's it's created from these fundamental things. So I wouldn't call nation states or borders or things that we observe or rules that we follow or cultures or any of that stuff fundamental. It's not fundamental at all. In information, what's fundamental is probably ones and zeros. What's fundamental is ways of creating information. What do you create ones and zeros out of? Ones and zeros aren't built up out of anything. You create information out of ones and zeros. So a ones and a zero, state one versus state two, this versus that, change. Now I'm in this state, now I'm in that state. Well, if I'm in this state, I used to be in that state. Time. You see, I have change. I've got a before and after state. Time is fundamental. Existence, such as a one or zero, is fundamental because it builds other things. But what it builds is not fundamental. So the whole structure that it builds could be built some other way. Wouldn't have to be that way. It's not fundamental. Consciousness wouldn't have to create this particular virtual reality. You know, this virtual reality had a rule set, had initial conditions, hit the run button, and there was lots of probability and chance in there. It could have come up some other way. So if we look at it and we happen to have a lot of avatars and consciousnesses, and they make nation states, and they play borders, and they make laws, and they throw some people in jail, and some people they promote and give them awards, and all of that is not fundamental. It's just the way we agree to be. It's just the circumstances of our interaction. Nothing fundamental about it. So things like borders between countries is it's like doubly or triply non-fundamental. You know, it's got a lot of stuff that's non-fundamental underneath of it and behind it. So that's my sense of what's fundamental. Time is, and in our particular virtual reality, things like mass and charge, time and space, gravity, these things are fundamental because they're just in the rule set. Nothing built them, nothing made them happen. They just were a given part of the rule set. And that makes them then fundamental. Now we have these fundamental particles, like, I don't know, lots of them, we have like 60 of them, these fundamental particles. And I guess all of those particles really shouldn't be called fundamental because some of them are derived from other particles, but we do end up with some of them at the bottom level that are fundamental. And we've gone through a series of what's fundamental. It used to be that the molecule was fundamental. Then we broke that up and we saw that it was made of atoms. Then atoms were fundamental. And then, oh no, they're not fundamental. Neutrons and protons and electrons are fundamental. Nothing can get any smaller than that. Oh, well, we broke those up too. Now there's other pieces that are fundamental. And how far will that go? It will go just as far as we take it until we hit the resolution boundaries of the virtual reality. How small a piece can we get? A pixel, right down to the size of a pixel. That's how far we can go. And once you hit that barrier, it's fundamental. Nothing else. You can't break that apart. You can't take a pixel and say, now we have 2 pixels, because that's the basic fundamental structure of your virtual reality. So all of our fundamental particles are very not likely to be fundamental because we're a long way before where the pieces are down at the resolution level. That's a long way yet to go. So we will probably find that all the fundamental things we have now will break down into more fundamental things. Because at least that's my view of what's fundamental and what's abstract and what isn't. There are fundamental things, and those are the unchanging basic givens. Everything else is a construct. And why did it get constructed the way it is? Some of it's probability, some of it's good luck. It's just the way we happen to be and the way things happen. They're not, it could be different just as easily as not. Fundamental things can't be different just as easily as not. They just are. Did that work?
Yes, I understand it.
Okay.
Second question from Mickey and Emily. Question from Mickey: how would you explain the surge in population size on Earth over the last century using MBT?
Yes. Got a microphone? Or he'd like to clarify that question.
Okay.
I'll speak louder.
No, it's all right. Better that you speak in the mic so that when this gets published as a video, they can hear your question. Otherwise, my answer won't make much sense if we don't hear your question.
My question is actually how many consciousness like us there are. If they're a fixed number, or according to the evolution they change, meaning they get less or more, and this is why I asked about the population.
Okay, that's a good question. The number of individuated units of consciousness that we have, is that a fixed number? We just kind of stuck with that, and obviously if I say we're stuck with that, then there's a problem with population increasing, right? But the way it started, to answer that question, is that we start the simulation, right? We hit the run button, we start with the initial conditions, we start evolving this thing. As it evolves, eventually things evolve that have a capacity to make choices. Well, now it's gotten interesting. And it continues to evolve. Maybe that was a clam, or maybe it was a bumblebee, or maybe it was something else. A jellyfish could make choices. And it became a little interesting. Then it kept evolving and got more and more interesting. At some point along the line, the choices were interesting enough, the decision space was big and rich enough that a consciousness was willing to go have that experience because it was valuable, because there were choices to make. Okay. And choices about low entropy or higher entropy choices. So we'll even call that moral choices to make. Maybe that didn't get interesting until you got to mammals, or maybe it didn't get interesting until, whatever. But at some point, it was interesting enough in the evolution. At that point, individuated units of consciousness began to get in the game. They begin to partition off apart and get immersed in the game because the game was valuable, where it wasn't before. Okay, so let's go just before that point. Before the first consciousness decided to get in the game, it's still a simulation. And there's all these simulated virtual avatars, whatever they were. Well, who's playing them? The system. They're called, computer-generated characters. In other words, the computer itself is generating these characters. And until they become interesting, a consciousness doesn't sign up to play them. So there are no players. All the players are, non-PG, you gamers, tell me, what's the thing for computer-generated characters? Non-player characters, NPG. I think that's the...
NPC.
NPC?
Non-playing characters.
Okay. Anyway, that's what they were. They were all non-player characters. They were all played with the computer. And in World of Warcraft, some of the characters running around have a consciousness somewhere on a computer running them, and others are not. Others, the computer just runs them. They're non-player characters. So they were all that way. And then it started to drift to where there were more and more conscience coming in because the evolution of this game got more and more complex. It had more and more interesting choice space was developing. All right, let that continue on for a while. Eventually, it gets, it basically gets full. Okay, so now we're back, 1 million BC or 2 million BC or something. Maybe humans only been around for 100,000 years or something, but the spaces fill up. And why do the spaces fill up? Because consciousness wants pieces of itself to play the game when the game gets interesting. Well, how does a consciousness make an individuated unit of consciousness? That's easy. All you have to do is make the first one, and after that, you can copy and paste. It's a digital system. Or you can take what's been successful with the earlier stuff and modify it a little bit. You can make it at pretty much any level you want. So this is a digital system. So as avatars that were interesting came available, consciousness would attach to them and play them rather than just let the computer play them as NPCs. That still goes on now. So let's say, now our population's grown a whole lot, more than it's ever had, probably more than the first, 2 million years all added together, probably wouldn't have more population than we have now. Well, there's just that many more pieces of consciousness. How many bacteria can you put in a petri dish? It's that sort of thing. You can create as many as you need. And if you still have some NPCs when you need them, let's say you just happen to need a character to do a particular thing in this virtual reality, but you don't want to make a wave in the virtual reality. You can just insert a character, an NPC, let it do its function, and then let it walk off into the fog and disappear. See, virtual reality can be very strange. So NPCs can be a part of it. So there's not just any limited number, it's not just fixed, it's not a closed game, it's completely open-ended, and you can get as many NPCs, as many characters, as many individuated units of consciousness as want to play. The system isn't going to say, we don't want any more. After all, it's here to grow up. The more that are growing up, this is the fast track. The slow track was back there in that chat room with the other, 100,000 people. That's the slow track. This is the fast track that we're on. This is where you actually get to grow. I know it doesn't sound like the fast track when you're in there working at it and you don't seem to make any progress, but this is really the fast track in consciousness evolution. So whatever it can hold, probably how many conscious you have in there. So then let's say a big catastrophe happens and 500 million people all die. Well, now those slots go away. There's not that many elves in the game anymore, right? You're going to have to wait for it to repopulate. Okay? Or you could just put a whole bunch of characters in there and then let somebody play them at an advanced stage instead of starting from scratch, but that wouldn't be probably too good. You'd probably put some NPCs to help flesh out what you needed, and gradually, as there more come online, you'd add more consciousnesses to it, more players. So it's adjustable.
So some are deleted as well?
Some can be deleted. Now, that's pretty rare that you delete, but it's a possibility. Let's say you were this larger consciousness system and you had subsets doing this experience because they're on the fast track to learning and growing. And let's say you had some that just weren't functioning for you, they weren't working. And you get to a point where the probability that they would work goes to zero, close. So there's always probability, and even a real bad guy can turn around, see things differently, next incarnation, does better. So as long as there's potential, you'd keep playing it. That's the point. Because you don't want to mess with the game any more necessary. You'd like to let it go and just run, come out however it does, rather than constantly being meddled with it. So anyway, you can have whatever you need can generate there. It's not a closed system. There's always new coming in at the bottom end, I would suspect, because our population is growing. As the population grows up, then new individuated units of consciousness are taking spots. Now, what does new mean? Does it have to come in at the bottom of the barrel, or could it come in someplace else? Well, it needs to come in probably at a place where growth is the most rapid. Growth is always the most rapid near the bottom of the barrel, right? Your growth is really rapid when you're 2 years old. The difference between how much you learn when you're 2 and how much you learn with 3 in a year is huge. You're a completely different, being in 1 year. Everything changes. You're probably twice as much body mass. You understand 10 times more than you did before. So if you start near the bottom, you have a lot of change. And change is significant. It's how much progress are we making? How much entropy are we reducing? So I would think it would be more practical to send new individuated units of consciousness in somewhere down at the lower levels, because they can change quicker from there. That's perhaps why this is an elementary school and not a graduate school. So there's always new coming in at the bottom. And like we were talking about deletion, and That's a really hard thing to do, to get deleted. It's very hard to get to the point where there's no potential. Almost everybody, no matter who or what they've done, have potential. So it gets to the point, though, that there's a character with just no potential. Then if I were the system, I'd delete it. It's just wasted bits. You just delete it and, you know, let some other player give it a, you know, give that a try. So, and sometimes I've been in situations in the larger conscious system where people who disobey the rules, don't play the game right, have been, what do they say in the mafia, disappeared. You know, they're just not there anymore. Now, I don't know whether they've been deleted or whether they've just been removed from that particular virtual reality because they were not abiding the rules. Now, that's not so much what happens here in our virtual reality. That's some other of the looser rule set things. That there are rules. You know, any structure has to have rules. If you don't have rules, you have chaos. And sometimes entities just won't abide by the rules. And when they do, I have noticed occasionally that they are just disappeared. But I don't know what that means in the bigger picture. I don't know where they ended up. Maybe they're just gone. Maybe they're deleted. Maybe they're just put in you know, foster care for a while.
So the question of Emil: how does MBT apply to large corporations if we see them as information systems?
Well,
with the goal of reducing entropy, what is the role of the captains of industry then?
Yeah, well, industry is, of course, a structure that we build, right? It's one of our structures, one of our groupings. And industry, you know, you can say that you know, nations are one of the structures that we build, and nations have cultures, kind of the rules that run the nature. Corporations have cultures. It's the way those people think and the way they act. You know, there's corporate cultures, and some corporate cultures are kind and nice and you know, like to treat everybody well, and other corporate cultures are just as mean and abusive as possible. So it depends on the group. It depends on who's making and enforcing the rules, but all of that is changeable. So the corporate entity is just like all the rest of us. It's a collection of individuals, and those individuals that make it up, their culture is a sum of all those consciousnesses, and with the rules, and of course with the leadership. And what is their goal? What should they be doing? These captains of industry, well, they should be growing up. They should be trying to become love. They should be looking at being cooperative and what can they do to help? And no, a lot of them aren't doing that. What they're doing is, how can I grab more of the money? So they're not particularly grown. Just because you're a CEO that makes $10 million a year doesn't mean that you're evolved or that you're having a successful incarnation. Success isn't judged by how much money you make or how much status you have. It's judged by how low your entropy is, the quality of your consciousness, your spiritual growth. That's your success. So the guys, people who get into those kind of positions, not just corporations, heads of state, presidencies, you know, congresses, advisors who advise people who make big decisions that affect millions of people when they make those decisions. These people aren't any different than you and I. They're here to grow up. They're just in a different position. And it's generally not accurate to think that these people, even if they tend to do mean things, even if they're greedy or whatever, it's generally not right to think that they are worse than everybody else. Okay, here's the terrible dictator, and he's awful, and he murders people, and he's a tyrant. Well, it's not so much that all the little people are really nice and grown, and the dictator is a tyrant, you see. If you just randomly pick somebody off the globe and gave them the job of dictator, there's a real high probability they would be a tyrant, just like the old dictator. It's not that the dictator is so much worse than us, it's just he has more power to express his quality of consciousness, which isn't very high. Well, the guy who has very little power for that expression, he grumbles, he swears, he gets home, he kicks the dog, he slams the door, and he's rude to his wife. That's all he can do. If he was any more rude, his wife would hit him with a frying pan. So he's limited in what he can do. So he kicks the dog. The dog won't bite. So that's as much as he can do. If he happens to be the leader of a nation with a big war machine, then wow, look at what he can do then. You see? So those leaders and those corporations represent us. They're like us. So you take all the people on the planet and say, what's our average quality of consciousness here on this planet? Well, that's what you get. What you see is what you get. So those CEOs and those dictators and the people that make these decisions that annoy all of us, they're not a lot different than we are. They just have more power to express who they are. Our power doesn't, nobody notices, because our power is so small that nobody really notices what we do until we get arrested or something, hit with a frying pan, then somebody notices. But until that, we're kind of low on the scale. That's the problem with the, all the schemes that are going to save the world. Well, if we just did this, the world would be a happy place. Utopia. Well, if we just were socialists, the world would be a good place, or communists, or capitalists, or any number of the utopians that have started. If there was just free love and there was just this and that, it would be a utopia and everybody would live happily ever after. Those things don't work because they're not populated by perfect people. Given perfect people, it doesn't matter what kind of structures you have, they will morph and change into good structures that are helpful. You see, if all of us were high quality, our governments, our industry, and other things would be a lot higher quality too, because they represent us. You see, that's just how the world works. So we can point at those guys that create trouble for us, but they're really not so different than us. And the best thing we can do is fix ourselves. And if enough of us fix ourselves, that will automatically fix itself. So you see, it wouldn't matter what kind of economic system you have, whether it was communist or socialist or anything else, capitalist, whatever you started with, if your country or whatever your economy is based on, if it were all populated by really low entropy people, very high quality people, if we had all real high quality people in that, whatever that government was, it would find a way to serve the people. It would find a way to do its functions and do them efficiently, as effectively and cooperatively as possible. Doesn't matter where it starts from. See? So that's kind of the good news and bad news both. It's good news that we can fix it. It's bad news that as bad as it is, it looks just like us.
This is a French question. I'm going to read it first in French and then I'm going to try to translate it in English. Comment se fait-il que j'ai trouvé exactement la maladie de Pascal T sur le corps de Gérard D et inversement? How come that I was able to find exactly Pascal T's sickness on Gérard D's body and vice versa?
I think I mentioned that earlier, that we always have people who do that. And I've had any number of people say that they got all of them right. Like they got all 4 of those healings we've done so far. They got every one of them right, but they got them on the wrong people. And what happens, and the same with the remote viewing. I've had people say I got all the remote viewing targets correct, but I didn't get them at the right time. I got the saw when it was supposed to be the beater, and I just got them all mixed up. That's probably due to a sloppy intent. Probably, and it's not something that really your intellect probably even notices, it's just the way you form words and thoughts in your mind. Probably when I said, look at, look at the picture, or look at this person, Pascal T or whatever, that you had an intent that went out to heal the target, and you may have said his name in your mind, or you may have said his name in his mind when you heard me say it, you may have said it, but there would be something in your intent that was more general, that said, I'm going to heal the target. I want to heal the target, okay? I'll heal, or even I'm going to heal that target. And that's not specific enough. So it's not that your intellect didn't get it, it's that at the being level, it wasn't put out there with enough specificity that you did get a target. You just didn't get the right target. That's my guess. Other than that, I don't know, but I know that it's a common occurrence, and every time there are people who get them in wrong orders. And that's the only thing I can think of, is that somewhere at the being level, your intent isn't clear, and it's to get the target, a target, or that target, but the, a, and that aren't defined well at where the being level intent comes at. The intent isn't held. You may have that intent that it's Pascal, but then you might let that intent go in your mind. All right, I want to do Pascal, and then you get into it and you're thinking about it, and instead of thinking Pascal, you're thinking the target or that energy body or something, and you lose. Remember I say hold it, have that intent and hold it. If you don't hold it, you might lose it, and then it might turn into something else. So you have to keep that intent the whole time you're working. You have to keep that intent, and even if you start with it and then you let it go, in your mind you may be thinking, I want to heal that one, or something non-specific that doesn't work very well. You get them confused. So that's my guess at what's going on. That hold it that I ask you to do takes practice to keep that intent in your mind. And everything you do during that exercise, when I say, use your beam, or use this, in your mind, I'm using this beam on Pascal. I'm changing this thing with Pascal. You hold that intent. The intent there is that you're working on Pascal all the way through that exercise. That's what I mean by holding that intent. It's always, this is Pascal. Okay, now turn it around. That's Pascal I'm turning around. So all of my intents, you have to keep the intent that the good energy is white, the bad energy is black. You have to keep that intent through the whole time. You're turning it around, you have to maintain that intent. So hold that intent means hold that intent. You keep that intent in your mind so it's present there all the time. If you let that intent go, then you start getting random stuff. And randomly you go into probably you may have gotten some of the healing that we're going to do tomorrow. You may have gotten some of those today and yesterday. You won't know yet until we go look at them as to whether you hit any of those, but you might have if your intent slipped a little and you weren't holding it, and your mind just kind of let that fact go, moved on to other things. We tend to do that. But that's one of the practices you get with your intent. So it's one of the things you have to learn with practice, to hold that intent so that every action you do tells you what you're doing, why you're doing it, what all the variables are, and you keep that all present in your mind and stays there. So, practice. And that's probably why. Is that you weren't successful in holding the intent.
Another French question. Le point de conscience est-il cet instant où la conscience est consciente d'elle-même? Is point consciousness this moment when consciousness is aware of itself?
Yes, that's a good description. Just consciousness aware of itself, but I would add, and aware of nothing else. Consciousness aware of itself, and that's all. No other thing. So it's basically the Descartes, I am. And that's all that's in your reality is that I am.
The person has another question, just to make sure he or she understands. Le modèle probabiliste est soumis au temps linéaire. Est-ce que la conscience élargie fonctionne et répond à 10-44 secondes de ce temps linéaire? So the probabilistic model is under linear time. Is the larger consciousness functioning and respond at 10 to the minus 44 seconds of that linear time.
That 10 to the minus 44 seconds, that's what's normally called Planck time in physics, and the length, I think it's like 10 to the minus 36 meters is the smallest length of a pixel, and that's called Planck length. And those are the points where quantum mechanics says that time and length become granular. In other words, that's when you hit the resolution. That's when you hit the pixels. So time turns into pixels and length turns into pixels at about those lengths that they have calculated. Now, whether those calculations are right or wrong, well, we don't know that yet. That's not an experiment that we can do because it's too small for us to work with. But at this time, that's what they think. So that's the numbers I'm using because I don't have any better numbers to use other than those. Okay, now the time in our virtual reality was created, that delta t. Remember the slide where speed of light came from? We come up with a delta t value and we come up with a delta x. Really it's a volume. This is a chunk of pixel volume, but we'll just talk about a length. And we come up with the smallest resolution in space and the smallest resolution in time because of how much data that's going to compute. The smaller your time, the more throughput you got in your computer, because the faster you're spinning around doing calculations, the faster you have to do calculations. It's like the refresh rate on your monitor. You recalculate all the intensities and colors on every pixel on your monitor, 60 times a second. So your refresh rate is 1/60th of a second. Every 1/60th of a second, you go in and you update all the pixels as to intensity and color. That's the refresh rate. Our refresh rate is what I'm calling delta t. Every 10 to the minus 44 seconds, you go in and you recalculate everything going on in the universe. Okay. Now, of course, this is a probabilistic reality, so everything going on in the universe doesn't have to be all those little atoms and particles and things. If it's nighttime, a star can just be a light in the sky. It doesn't have to be a big calculation because it's not a bottoms up. If it were bottoms up, it would have to be a big calculation. Every 10 to the minus 44 seconds, you'd have to recalculate the position and the activity of every particle in the universe. Every 10 to the minus 44 seconds. That's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? That's a lot of computation. And why? Why are you computing all this stuff that nobody's interacting with? Doesn't have anything to do with the players. Well, this is just here for the players. All you have to calculate is what the player is sensing. Nothing else. You see, so that really simplifies your problem a whole lot. And now you don't have to calculate it with any more accuracy than what your player needs. If your player looks out and sees sees a rock out there, you don't have to get down to the molecules of the rock. All you have to do is there's something gray and lumpy. So lumpy gray is a lot easier than 100 million, chunks of calcium carbonate or whatever the rock is. So I don't know if I've answered the question or not. Did I answer the question or do we need more? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Let's give her the mic. And, those of you who have asked the question, just speak up when we're doing your question because we want to get your question answered.
En fait, c'est parce que ce matin, vous avez dit que la conscience élargie répondait très rapidement et avait... Oui, alors je recommence. Je voulais savoir si ce matin vous avez dit que la conscience élargie avait la réponse tout de suite et je me suis posé la question de savoir s'il y avait un lien entre ce 10 puissance moins 44 secondes et le temps de réponse de la question de la conscience élargie. Voilà, c'était l'objet de ma question.
No, there's no link between those two. Consciousness is in a different reality frame than this physical virtual reality. And in the conscious reality frame, the delta T is much, much, much smaller. Matter of fact, there's billions, I think it's a billion little delta T's in the consciousness frame for every big, slow, fat delta T that goes by in our virtual reality. So it's very quick there. It is not instantaneous in the sense that it's still a virtual reality with its own clock and it does have to iterate, but it's so far beyond what we can imagine that instantaneous is a good approximation. See, there's no space. When we think of consciousness, there's really no space. That's our concept, that we have a computer here and a consciousness sitting over here, and you got to transmit across the space. But there's really no space in our concept. There isn't any. That's a virtual reality, 3D virtual reality. We have space, and you could have a 2D reality, and there'd be space in an area. But in consciousness, there is no space. But we still have time. Yeah, it's still.
Il y a le temps.
Yeah.
Voilà, il n'y a pas d'espace, no space, but time, yes.
Yes. Yes, some sort of time is required because time is fundamental, space is not. Space is computed. A computer computes space by creating a coordinate system. You say, here's an origin, here's X, Y, and Z. That just created space. So it's just a calculation. Time is not just created that way. Now, regular time that ticks regularly, like a metronome, that is created. And it's created by one of those faster clocks going 1 0 1 0 1 0 like a metronome. It just changes state, and that creates regular time. And once you have regular time, you can sequence things, you can keep track of where things are in time. But time is more fundamental than that. That regular time is a creation, a technology. And our regular time has to do with every delta T. Some other virtual reality has a different size delta T because if it's a real loose rule set, there's not so much data. You don't have to calculate it so fast to get this real high resolution like you do here. So it would have a different clock. So all of those times are not fundamental. But time itself comes into this with our assumption. We started with that consciousness cell, which was our assumption that just consciousness exists, basically. And it could be in this state and that state. Well, is it this state before that state or this state after that state? You see, time is there. Just the fact that it could change states, you say the word change, you've created time. Because you can't have change without time. If you have before and after, you've got time. So some sort of primordial time, which is totally fundamental, comes in right with our assumptions, because another assumption was evolution. Well, evolution's about change. You can't have evolution if there's no time. So when you say evolution exists and consciousness exists, logically you've also said time exists. Otherwise there's no change. So that's just part of our assumption. And where does that primordial time come from? Same place that primordial consciousness cell come from, Don't know. That's out of our, that's us, the intestinal bacteria, trying to find out, about nuclear fusion in the sun. We just can't get there from here.
Are there beings in PMR who are so evolved that their intent can create physical things? Examples of being: Jesus feeding the 5,000s, or alchemists turning lead into gold.
Okay. Are there people who are able to move matter, can use their intent to basically do miracles, right? Walk on the water, feed lots of people on a fish, make gold out of lead, and so on. Or do evil things. Start out with evil, making monsters and things. Yes, there can be. You can sometimes hack the system, if you will, break the rule set, overpower others. But the answer is yes, theoretically, that's possible. It's not likely. Hard to do. There's rules against some of that. The science certainty principle says you can only make changes to a certain extent within natural uncertainty. So to manipulate something that's massive on a grand scale is very, very hard to do. Now, in a probabilistic reality, never say never. If there's one chance in 10 billion, well, eventually it might happen, because that's the way probabilistic systems are. So you don't ever say never. And if somebody could really move probability to take that 1 in a billion and move it up to only 1 in 100,000, well, then it's even more likely yet that random draw might hit that tail and just do something really phenomenal. So is that possible? Sure, it's possible, but it's unlikely. It's a very unlikely event, so they don't happen often. And is there somebody that does that at will? Whenever they want, they can walk on water or fly through the air and teleport places? Perhaps, but it's very unusual. Not impossible, but unusual. So yes, possible. Now, are there people who can do smaller manifestations of things? Sure. And as long as you have plausible deniability that it ever happened, which means it only happened in front of 10 or 15 people and nobody will believe them anyway, yeah, things like that can happen. People can learn to manipulate those sorts of events, and that's not as unlikely that can happen. But are they going to create a tidal wave that runs over top all of Europe or North America or something? Probably not. That's too unlikely. Can they maybe manifest something in their hand that wasn't there? Yeah, they might be able to do that, you see. Now, if all the news crews and the BBC and 60 Minutes and all those guys were watching with the cameras, good chance when they did that, nothing would happen. Or they wouldn't be willing to do it. You see, science certainty would have them there. They're going to create a discontinuity in the reality. But when there's just a few dozen people around who nobody's going to believe anyway, then sure, you can do things like that. So there's limitations to what you can do and when you can do it and under what circumstances you can do it. Now, on the other hand, you've got this larger consciousness system. And this larger consciousness system is trying to help us succeed. It can do whatever it wants. Talk about hacking the system. It's a digital reality. It can, if it sees that some dramatic act is really necessary and is really going to help, and the probability that this is going to make everybody grow up more, then could it do that? It could. But in general, it doesn't like to mess with what's going on here. I mean, that's the whole point. We're in the schoolhouse where we interact and we get feedback. If the school's too weird, it interferes with our feedback. If every once in a while a pink elephant manifests someplace, that's interferes with our reality. We can't depend on the reality anymore if it's a funhouse reality. So we don't learn as well if it's undependable. We don't know what our feedback means. Was that my feedback, or was that just some miracle going on? You don't know. So the system tries not to do any big stunts, but could it have ever done that? Sure, it's possible. Have an open mind, but be skeptical.
You say that we humans and creatures are players in a virtual reality. Are all living organisms also players, meaning conscious players? For example, are plants, trees, single cells conscious players interacting with us? Or are they just a part of a rendered life support environment for us?
Under my definition of consciousness, I say that in order to be conscious, what I call conscious, you have to have a finite decision space. That means you have to have intentional choices. I can choose to do this or that. My choice, free will. I can do either. If you have that, then you have consciousness. If you can't do that, if you don't have any choices, things just happen because they happen and you have no choice, then you don't. So if you are a bumblebee or a clam or something that's in a lower scale of the decision space, you may have just a few decisions, things that you can do. Or maybe not. See, if you're a clam, you may decide when to open your shell, but you may not decide. That may just be hardwired into your DNA and there's no decision in it at all. Just certain circumstances happen, they trigger a response and the shell opens. Other things happen, it triggers a response and the shell closes. And there's no thought, there's no choice going on at all. Well, if there's no choice, then it's not conscious. If there is choice, there is consciousness. Well, that's my definition. And I use that definition because it makes a nice separate thing, because I'm talking about free will, I'm talking about growth, I'm talking about making decisions, so that definition suits me. Somebody else could define it differently. See? Somebody else could define just having awareness as being conscious. Now we may have to include a few other things that might have awareness but don't have any decision space. There's some evidence that says that some shrubs and bushes and trees and things have an awareness, but don't necessarily have any decision space. And then science might come along and do some experiments and find out that indeed clams do make certain decisions. You know, how they feed, how they mate, something may not just be hardwired to where they just do it as a stimulus response pair, but they actually have choices. Well, then I have to put that clam in with the conscious. So there's a gray area where I just don't know. You know, I can't tell you everything that's conscious and what's not, because sometimes it's hard to tell with a very minimal, you know, if your decision set's only 2 or 3 choices, it's very hard to tell whether you have any decisions or not. You know, you really have to study that to see whether decisions are being made, or is it just stimulus response going on? Is it just a hardwired response? Okay, so that's my definition of it. But indeed, some plants may have an awareness. They may be taking in some information, but they're not necessarily making any choices that aren't hardwired. Yes, trees and plants can follow the sun. They can do other things that make them look kind of smart, but most of that's just hardwiring. The sunshine shines on this side of the stem, which makes that loosen up, and the one in the shade tightens up, and that twists the sun so it follows the sun. You see, that's just hardwiring, not that the plant says, oh, look at the sun. I could just stay here and look the other direction if I want, but I like the sun, so I'll follow it. See, that's a choice. If the plant's not making a intentional choice, it has an intention that it can choose, then my definition says not conscious. But I understand there may be gray areas in between that other people could define it differently. That definition just suits me. But no, every cell, every amoeba, whatever, most of those things are just stimulus response, unless we discover that they're not. You know, I don't know. Something that simple, it's hard to tell. Why does an amoeba do what it does? It's a hard question. You'd really have to spend time studying amoebas to know why they do what they do. Couldn't you train them to, you know, do a maze? Well, maybe, but maybe they just, you know, cut and try and have memory. Well, memory's not enough to be conscious. You know, you have genetic memory, they might remember it. It's hard to tell what's conscious, what's not. Now, minerals, you know, crystals, doornails, you know, dead as a doornail, you know, a doornail's conscious, and minerals and things, I'd say no, and it's because they don't have choices. A rock doesn't have a choice whether it rolls downhill. It's just gravity makes it do that.
So this person has 2 questions. I think I will say both of them because they might be connected. Certaines personnes prônent que le cœur a la prédominance sur leur cerveau. Qu'en pensez-vous? Qu'est-ce que ça change à ma vie, la preuve que tout est virtuel? So, certain people think, I'm translating, certain people think that the heart supersedes the brain. What's your take on that? And what does it change to my life? The evidence of that everything is virtual.
Well, the big change is that it's a virtual heart, it's a virtual brain. Both of them are just data in a computer on a hard drive. Neither one, both of them just are constraints on the data stream that goes to the player. So it makes no difference. Now, if you don't have the virtual idea and you think that the physical is fundamental, then you might think that the heart has its properties, the brain has its properties, and these things are fundamental and they do things and so on. But I don't subscribe to that. I subscribe they're both virtual. The brain doesn't remember anything, doesn't process anything, doesn't really do anything other than set constraints. Same with the heart, same with everything. It's just an avatar, is a digital concoction computed out of a computer. It has no function other than to do what the rule set says it can do, which limits the data that the consciousness gets that has to be according to what this avatar can do. If I'm playing my elf can't flap its arms and fly because that's not in the rule set. My elf can't walk through trees, it's not in the rule set. My elf can only do those things that are in the rule set. I can only do those, my consciousness now working as body can only do those things as body can do. It can't manage anything else. I can't flap my arms and fly either. You see, so I get older, I can do different things than I could do when I was younger, and my consciousness is playing an older character now, so it's constrained. Depends on what the constraints are. I get sick and have meningitis and have hallucinations, and that's what my conscious has to play, because that's how the rule set's playing a game. So that's what the physical things do. If I have a heart attack or my heart runs fast or whatever, then the consciousness playing that character has to deal with that. Stuff happens to the elf and you have to deal with it. You have to play the game according to the rule set. So all those things do, the brain, the heart, the feet, all of that, all they're doing is setting constraints on the rule set. What can that character do? I'm working this character, and my main job is to make choices. Choices are what my character does. That's my job as a consciousness. And that heart and that brain give me some choices. If that heart is a damaged heart, and now my character can't run, he can only walk slowly, well, I get different choices. Or that brain is a retarded brain, then I get different choices. Or it's a brilliant brain, I got different choices. So it just sets the choices according to the rule set. The rule set just says it can only think so fast and jump so high, and that's the game I have to play, is the avatar that has those attributes. And we give special meaning to hearts. It's the heart center, and that's where the love is, and the brain is where the consciousness is, and other things. But those are metaphors that we use to help us understand things around us. We make everything body-centered because we believe that the physical reality is the fundamental reality. So everything must derive from the physical. So if we're going to send out love energy, it has to come from someplace physical. And actually the energy we send out actually has to be physical, some kind of field that nobody understands yet. So we just believe that everything is physical, and that the brain sends out brain waves that read vibes and connect with other things. Well, the connections are really being made in consciousness, it's not the brain. But we describe that in terms of those metaphors because that's what we're used to. So the big difference being virtual means is that you have to think about reality totally different. Instead of the heart and it does, and the brain what it does, and so on, you have to realize that it's not hearts and brains. They're just virtual hearts and brains. It's intent and consciousness. It's the player that's important, not the avatar. The player's where the action is. The avatar is just data in the computer. It's how much does that consciousness project out and connect to people? How much does that consciousness send out love to other people? That's what's going on. And we use metaphors to explain it in terms of physicality, because that's what our culture believes, and that's what we believe when we grow up in that culture. And it just feels right to us to do it that way. When you do it with virtual reality, it feels kind of weird. So it's natural to think that physical reality is the fundamental thing. I'm sure the elf feels that way too.
Okay, this one is in French, I'm going to translate it as well. Est-il possible que lorsque l'on travaille en guérison, l'information reçue ne soit pas visuelle, comme des taches noires par exemple, mais perçue dans le corps, des informations perspectives, au lieu de voir des taches noires? Et est-ce que le fait de connaître la personne personnellement facilite le processus de transmission? So I have to move because I'm too far from the basis of the transmission. Is it possible that when we work on the healing technique, the information that we receive is not visual, like the black parts of the body, but perceived in the body, like physical perceptions? And is the fact of knowing the person personally helps the process of healing?
Okay. First question is, can we feel our way through this rather than see our way through it? And the answer is yes, absolutely. The seeing part of it is just a metaphor. You know, the black and the white and the gingerbread cookie guy, all that's just metaphor for us to help us focus our mind. We can focus our mind without any visuals, works just as well. Focusing your intent is the key. And you can focus that intent in many ways. Visuals are just handy because most people can do gingerbread cookies easily. Some people don't. It's a fact of biology that males tend to be more visual and have easier time visualizing than females. So there's a lot of females that feel their way through it. It just feels right, or it feels like it's here. And you say, well, what do you mean it feels like it's here? And they'll generally say, I don't know. It just feels like it's here. They get it, but they don't interpret it. See, they get the information, but they don't interpret it in terms of pictures. They interpret it some other way. And that other way is hard to describe. So you describe it as it just feels like it's, you know, what the problem is, it feels like it's here, maybe, or it feels like it's there. And they can't tell you exactly how that works. And it doesn't matter how it works. It works, and it's just as accurate and just as good, and there's not a problem with it at all. Any way that you can get the information is fine. So that's step one. It doesn't, it's fine to get it that way. No problem. What was the second set of that? Last question.
Is knowing the person that you're healing facilitating the process?
Yes. No. Actually, it can make the process harder. It could make it easier, it could make it harder, it could have no difference at all, it depends on you. The way it could make it harder is that if you know that person and you have an emotional connection to them, say it's a child, and they're sick, and you want to help them, you may have such an emotional connection to that you can't do it because you can't be just from the being level projecting this. You have a need for it to work. You have, this is important, you know, and you have feeling and emotion poured into it, and all of that stuff gets in the way. You can't get your intellect out of the way. The intellect is saying, I got to do this. This is important. I hope this works. And then you're doing, and you're so attached to it that you can't be what's called detached. You do better with healing if you're just detached. If you have an emotional connection, it gets in the way. So if it's somebody you don't know, it's easy to be attached to somebody you don't know. You know, Susie Q, nobody knows who that is, so it's easy to send energy to Susie Q. Your hurt child, tough. A lot of people have trouble healing themselves for that same reason, because they're emotionally attached to themselves and to their illness, and they just doesn't seem to ever work for them because they can't become detached. If you're not detached, your mind is noisy. That detachment is what gives you this clear, still mind with real good, clear focus. If you're attached and you're anxious about the outcome, it doesn't work very well. So that's how knowing somebody can be a problem. Now, if you know somebody, oh yeah, it's my next door neighbor, well, that's not, you're not necessarily attached there, and it may do just fine because you know your next door neighbor and you know some things that maybe would help you focus on that person. So it could be a help too. But mostly it really doesn't matter. It can be some person on the other side of the planet with an illness, and it works just the same if it's somebody sitting next to you in the chair. Distance is irrelevant. You just have to have a specific address so you can pick out that individual among all 7.5 billion of us.
Is it more profitable to eliminate fear through real-world experience versus doing it solely in your head or in a cave?
Yes. If you do it solely in your head or in a cave, what? Oh,
is it more profitable to eliminate fear through the real-world experience versus doing it solely in your head or in a cave?
Yeah. Yes, the difference is if it's in your head or it's in a cave and it's not really an experience of yours, it is much easier to trick yourself. If it's only in your head, you might say, oh yeah, I'm doing good. I got rid of that fear and I got rid of that fear and I don't fear traffic anymore. I'm sitting in a cave, right? That's easy to say. I'm sitting in a cave up in the Himalayas and I say, you know, rush hour traffic doesn't bother me at all. Well, of course it doesn't bother you at all. You don't have to interact with it. You see, so it's easy to say, I don't have any fear when there's nothing around you. There's no I don't fear that people don't like me because I'm the only person in the cave. So it just makes it easy to trick yourself that you're very grown just because these things aren't being triggered. So now it doesn't mean you might grow in a cave, but I'm saying it's just easier to trick yourself, to think you're grown when you're not. It's easier to believe in your image and what you'd like to be and what you think you are as opposed to what you really are. Because what you really are isn't being tested. And it's the same if you just do it in your head. In your head, you can come to the conclusion, you know, that you're brilliant and enlightened. But it may not be true if you don't have experience. Experience is what tells us what's going on. So you go out and interact with the real world and you run into some really rude people and you run into some really bad laws and you get arrested for this or that and, you know, somebody picks your pocket and you have to deal with life. That's when you find out how grown you are and how much entropy you've got in your system, is how you react to all that stuff, you see? Or you get in social situations that you have to be kind in, or you have to show caring for people, even if maybe they're not giving that back to you. You need to relate to them in some way. So it's much better to learn experientially. And another point that I should make with that one that I haven't said to everybody, and that is, we talk about lowering entropy, and we want to become low entropy people. Well, where's our entropy measure? You know, can I stick a thermometer in my mouth and pull it out and tell me how much entropy I've got today? I don't have that, but I do have something to tell you that is a really good measure of the quality of your consciousness. It's called emotion. You have emotions. And when you feel these emotions, the reason emotions are such a good reader of quality of consciousness is they don't come from up here. You don't think emotions. Emotions well up out of your being level. Emotions reflect who and what you are on the inside. They just happen and you just blurt them out and that's just the way they are. Now sometimes your head can suppress them. pretend that they're not there. That's true, but that's different. Your emotions come out of the being level, and it represents you. So if you have emotions where you get upset and you get angry, or you holler, or you scream, or you stamp your feet, or whatever you do when you're emotional, you get angry, you cry, you holler, we do a lot of things when we're emotional that are negative. If you have that kind of thing, then your quality of consciousness needs some work. If your emotions are generally joyous, they're happy, life is wonderful, there's lots of compassion, and you want to help, and you have these kind of emotions, then the quality of your consciousness is pretty good. So the emotions are really a good measurement of your quality of consciousness, because they don't come from the intellect, and you can't trick yourself. You can say, well, I'm not going to feel that emotion again. It won't work. If that emotion's triggered, no matter what that head says, it's going to bubble out. You might suppress it, but you're going to get the emotion anyway. So it's a good tool. It's kind of a window into what you are at the being level, is those emotions that come out. So that's a way to evaluate how you're doing, how you're feeling, is to keep track of those emotions and what they're doing. They should be very positive. It should be a lot of compassion and joy and happiness and satisfaction, and life is great, isn't it? That kind of a feeling. And if those are your feelings and emotions, most of the time, well, even occasionally is good, but most of the time is really good, and all the time is really, really good. And if almost none of the time, not so good. Never, that's worse. So that's the way you can tell.
Arnaud has 3 questions. He's very inspired. First, when accessing the larger consciousness system, how to tell if we were interacting with a free will awareness unit or only a probable entity?
Okay. I'll make that a little more general and say, when you're in the non-physical and you're interacting with another being, how can you tell that's another being and not just your imagination? You're not just making it up, that you're interacting with another person. Now, this said free will awareness unit would be a little more restrictive. Another person from this virtual reality would be a free will awareness unit, perhaps, but it could be a free will awareness unit in some other virtual reality too. But so, is that all right if I make that? How do I know that I'm talking to somebody other than myself? Is that the gist of it?
Arnaud, oui. Tu réponds?
Yeah.
Not exactly. It's more about being able to tell if you're talking with a free will person like you are and I am,
Mm-hmm.
or when you're out of the body, for example, you're talking to not a real free will person, but just a probability of it, like in the probable past or probable future.
Okay. Okay. The way you would differentiate between the two is how you got there, your intent, what you're doing. If you are in the database, then you're probably talking to just a probable person. If you're not in the database, if you're just out other than the database, then you are talking to somebody with free will. If you don't know where you are, because your intent's foggy, and you just kind of out there someplace, and who knows where you are, could be anything. So there's no way of telling, really, other than doing some experimentation. There is some experimentation you can do, but you'd have to be able to get back to that state and get connected with that person over and over and over again in exactly the same way. And then what you would do is you can ask a question, or you can do something that would create a response, okay? And then you'd get that response. And then you would, not right away, but the next day, you would go visit that person again, and you'd ask them maybe the same question, see if you get the same response. And ask them the same question, see if you get the same response. Eventually, if you get the same response every time and they don't show any sign of, why do you keep asking me this? Then it's probably just somebody in a database. If anybody with a free will is going to say, why do you keep asking me the same question over and over again? Or can't you think of anything else to say? You know, you'll get something back. But if it's just somebody in a database, you'll get the same response back every time. If you can do the same thing in the same way with the same person every time, you'll get exactly the same thing, and there'll be no sense of all that it ever happened before. You see, because they're not processing memory, they're not making choices or doing anything. It's just data. So if you go in and say this, you get a response. You say this, you get a response. Now they may say, well, you just said that if it's 2 days in a row, but if you're coming back again, it's like you're triggering this Google search for the first time today, you know, so it doesn't have any history with it, with your search. Make a response and repeat it. See what happens. I'd say if you repeat it 3, 4, 5 times, and it always is just the same each time, you're talking to a database. That's the way I would tell you. You'd have to do the experiment. Otherwise, there's really no way to tell. Data's data. When you get data, you interpret it, and you have no idea where the source is. We don't ever get to see the source. We just get the data. So it's hard to pull those apart. But if you're in an out of body and you didn't have any intent to go into a database, then you're going to get free will. There are people with free will. And usually you can tell that by interacting with them, usually. Sometimes not. Usually you can, and that's, well, if you just see them one time, you may not be able to tell. But if you interact with them often, you know, they form personalities, you have dialogues, they respond to what you say, and you can tell that the responses tend to be unique each time, rather than a repetition of the last time. Best test. That's what I've used in the past. That's really how I figured out that it was that the past databases were databases. I didn't know they were databases when I started out. You know, I thought that was just another dimension of reality where the old stuff kept playing the game. But I did that kind of testing. I went to it and had a reaction, which then I followed that reaction like 4 or 5 steps. I did something that made somebody else respond, which made somebody else respond, which created something else. So it was like a 4 or 5 in a chain of reactions. And then I'd come back again and do the same thing and see if I get the same chain of reaction. If 4 or 5 or 6 people are involved, it's a very low probability that you're going to get the same triggers in the same way that you had before, because you have all these people with free will. You know, and this person was standing here and that person was there and the other person was someplace else, and why was it like that? I come back and here they are. They're all in the same positions, like this, you know, like the actors all went back, you know, to the same spot, ready for the action to go, and start saying, something fishy here. So then I'd come back, and then I realized after a bunch of experimenting that it was a database. It wasn't at all what I thought it was. It was just a database, because it's predictable. People aren't.
The second question of Arnaud, when we switch data and access another physical dimension, how are we perceived by its inhabitants? How are we perceived by its inhabitants?
Yes. Okay.
Are we invisible? Do we manifest a body or something else?
All above. Depends on what you intend. You can be just an unobserved observer. So you're just observing. So basically you're in the comm channel, right? But you're not in the action. That's typically the way it works, where you just observe what's going on. So it's just like someone here, something here, could be observing this meeting, you see, from the non-physical. So they could be observing the meeting. There's a bunch of people here. We're talking about this subject. but we don't recognize them. They're non-physical, but they're in on the data stream. Well, that means they just have rights to listen. You know, what do they call it? They got listen rights. You know, it's like they can read, but they can't write. You know, they can't come in and interact and change things, but they got to read privileges. So that's one thing. But if you get a little better at it, you can join them as a body. So somebody could walk in the door and sit down in a chair, and that could be somebody from some other reality frame. Okay, that's a possibility.
There you go.
There it is. And that's a possibility, but if you do that, you just don't do that because you feel like it, and it's not open to just anybody to do. You need permission to do that from the system. And the system will make sure that you understand the rules and how to play that game before you're given permission. And if you mess up and don't do it well, permission will be revoked. What you have to do is not create any discontinuity in that system. So you have to appear someplace where nobody's around and notices that you suddenly are there. You have to do that in some way that you can get away with it. You know, like Clark Kent always has to go get in a phone booth, right, to be anonymous when he becomes Superman. So you have to come in anonymously. You know, you can't just float down out of the sky with lights flashing into a crowd, you know, and go, I'm here. You know, that won't work. So you have to be subtle about it and anonymous. That's one of the rules. And you have to leave the same way. And you have to not, you don't take things back with you. You don't leave things there. It's just a whole set of rules so that that you were ever there, it still has plausible deniability. You haven't changed anything. You haven't gotten away. You haven't created a discontinuity there. There's plausible, you know, that you were never there in the first place. So if you can maintain that and you're careful, you'll get permission. If you're capable, if you have enough ability to do that, you just manifest a body and join them. But you have to do it under the rules. Otherwise, your traveling card will be taken away from you and you won't be allowed to do that. You have to get permission to just stop in on somebody else's reality. Now we have sometimes here, there'll be little cameo appearances. You know, a little cameo means you just make a short appearance and then go. And that's what I meant. And sometimes those appearances are NPCs, non-player characters. They may just show up at the right time, do a little action. You know, they may come up, walk up to you, start a conversation, tell you something really critical you need to know. You know, walk around the corner where you don't see them and you look around the corner, there's nobody there. You know, that kind of thing. Just a little cameo appearance to get some information across that they were trying to get across to you, but you were being too thick-headed to listen, so they need to send somebody to tell you. So those kinds of things can happen sometimes, where somebody just kind of comes here to do something. But mostly that doesn't happen. Mostly it's just a non-physical entity that's part of the data stream that's listening and watching, but is non-interactive. So that's like they're watching our movie, but they can't interact with us. That's the rules. Not allowed to interact with us. And you do that for a long time before you get permission to do the other. So, is there another part to that?
And the third question, is suffering a necessary feature of all PMRs?
No, suffering's not necessary at all. Suffering is something we do to ourselves mostly. It's completely unnecessary. Suffering is something we do because of our fear, because of our ego, because of who we are. That's what creates most of our suffering. Well, sometimes bad things can happen. You may be at the wrong place, you know, when it rains hard and you don't have your raincoat. You may, you know, be in the wrong place when there's an earthquake. Somebody who's drunk can be driving on the opposite side of the road, come over and run into you head on, you know. Things can happen. There's probability here, and you may just draw the bad shot when we're interactive. It's not just us, but other people interact with us. So you get run over by a truck. That's a bad thing. And that may just happen because you're at the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, start over next time, you know, maybe it'll be better. It's one of those things. So chance things can happen.
This one is a French question, I'm going to translate as well. Est-ce que guérir une personne malade avec l'intention est possible, même si la personne n'a pas appris le sens de cette épreuve? Is it possible to heal somebody who is sick with intention, even if the person has not learned the lesson that was given by that sickness?
Yes, it's possible, but it's harder, and it's generally not a good thing to do. You can use your intent to overcome the free will of another person. You can override, you can bully somebody else from the non-physical and override their free will. That's possible. It's not a good thing to do. When you get better at healing, to where you are very effective in modifying reality, changing probable future, you need to be aware that quite a few people who are ill because that illness is on their path of things to learn. They've created that illness. That illness is part of where they're going and who they are and what they're doing. It's part of their feedback for who they've been. And to go in and take it away is to take away their lesson. And it's interfering with them. Okay? Now you're overrunning their free will. You're changing things for them. That's not a good idea. What typically happens when you're a beginner is that you're just not that strong. It's kind of hard to bully somebody when you're just real little. So until you get bigger, until you get stronger, and it's not a real big concern healing people, because if they're going to resist you, you just won't be successful. What happens is that you heal and they put it right back. And you heal and they put it right back. And you can get frustrated with that because you get that liver or something all shiny white and doing nice, and then you come look at it a little while later and it's as black as it was. You shine it all up again and a little later it's as black as it was. It just doesn't seem to stick. It isn't working for you. That's probably because they keep putting it back. It's just part of them. That sickness is them. Now, if you can, ask permission first before you heal. Say, would you mind if I, worked on you, since you're healing energy, would that be all right? But sometimes when you're doing these experiments as a beginner, that's hard to arrange because you'd like to have your subject double blind. You don't want to know who they are, you see? But if you're a beginner, you're not going to bully them. That's a long shot that you're going to do any of that. You might make them feel better for a few days, but after that, they'll just get right back to it. So don't feel too badly if you're practicing as a beginner. Just go practice. You're not going to hurt anything. You're just not that powerful. If you start feeling like you are becoming powerful, then you need more responsibility that you don't overrun people's free will. And one of the ways is, like I say, you heal and it comes back. Now, you can overpower that. If you're strong enough, you can change that. You can fix that tumor and make it so it's not cancerous anymore and it goes away. And you know what? In 6 months, they got another one. You can take that one away. And in 6 months, they get cirrhosis of the liver. You can take that one away. In another 6 months, they get run over by a bus. You're stuck. You can't take that one away. You see, they will do what they're doing, no matter what you do, for the most part. But you are making it really kind of more difficult to them, and you're prolonging it, and it's not a good thing to do. So you have to be aware of the individual. Another thing you'll find, that if you go to heal someone and it's just difficult, it just doesn't seem to work, it's probably because you really shouldn't be healing them. Those people who have a disease that they've created, maybe it's just created because they're so ornery and they're so negative that you just worn their body down, and that tumor is just an expression of all that angst in them. And that's it. You see, that'll be hard to work on. Now you have somebody else who just got, was in an accident of some sort. They just picked up a bug somewhere, they got sick, or somebody stepped on their foot, or they dropped a brick on their foot or something. If it's an accident, you'll find those people are easy to heal because there's nothing that they have done to create that. It's just there. It was bad luck. It was probability they got hurt, and you'll find that stuff will heal very quickly. So everybody won't react to your healing in the same way. If it's self-created, it's a lot tougher. And when it's tough, probably just ought to leave it alone. So that you have to filter. That's why you have to do statistics. That's why you have to heal 100 people, because it's not just you. You're only one of the variables. You got other, all the people you're healing are variables as well. So it takes a lot of people, and then you look at averages. Don't expect that you're going to do 100 people, all 100 of them will instantly, get well. There's too many variables for that to happen. You just have to look at, are you having an effect? If it's 50-50, then depends on what it is. You may not be having any effect. But if somebody's had some chronic illness and they've had it, for 14 years, and you work on them and then they get better, well, that's not like I just had a headache and it went away. Did you help me or not? That's something that was unexpected, very unexpected. So that gets more weight than something like fixing a headache could come and go by itself. So everything's different. You have to kind of keep track of what you're doing, who you're doing it to, what the circumstances are. But be careful with overriding things. Can be done, but isn't nice.
We're going to shift translator. He's fired.
Est-ce que tuer des animaux pour se nourrir contribue à augmenter l'entropie? Donc ne vaut-il pas mieux être végétarien si on veut aller vers la mer? Does killing animals to feed oneself enhance entropy? Does it increase entropy? And then wouldn't it be better to be a vegetarian if one wants to move towards love?
Okay, that's about eating critters. That's a good question. And the answer to that is, if you kill things for pleasure, that's not nice. Okay, that's not on your path to caring and being, moving toward love. If you kill things because you have to, you're an animal too, and you can kill things because you need something to eat. Okay, so you go out and hunt the rabbit, and you catch the rabbit, and you eat it because otherwise you don't have anything to eat. Well, there's no penalty there. You're like all the other animals, the human animal and the tiger animal and whatever else. We all do what we need to do to survive, and sometimes we kill other things in order to do that. Okay, we're omnivores. We eat meat as well as other things. We can't. But when it is something that you do that you don't have to do, when it's just a matter of doing it because you want to, you like it, it's fun, tastes good, or whatever, habit, it's because everybody else does, for those reasons, if you go out and kill things for that reason, then there's a moral issue involved there. You kill things for your pleasure. That's not the same as killing things because you're hungry and you might starve. Killing for pleasure is an unnecessary killing. You don't have to kill. You can eat and be healthy without it, but you like to do it anyway. So I'd say yes, that is a moral issue. And partly it depends on your awareness. If you're not aware of that as a moral issue and you just eat meat and it never occurred to you that it wasn't nice to kill critters for your pleasure and it's just something you do because you always did it, then there's not a lot of you don't get too many black stars for that because it's just part of your culture. It's just the way things are. But once you realize that, oh, I'm having things killed for my pleasure, and then you realize that all of these critters that you're having killed, they live a pretty miserable existence before they get killed. They're treated very badly or something like that. Then you can add another moral issue to it. See? So, yes, there is a moral issue there. If we're talking about kindness and compassion, it's toward all sentient beings, all consciousness, all things that are alive and out there and have a life, got something to do, you know. It's their life, they're growing, they're experiencing here, and we need to have respect for them. That's just a general thing, like respect for living things. You know, you don't go out and chop down a tree just because you want to see if it makes a loud noise when it hits the bottom. You know, that's not good stewardship of our environment to do those kinds of things. If you cut down a tree because otherwise you'll freeze to death if you don't have wood or some other thing, it's a different matter. But to do it just to hear it land on the ground is not a good enough reason to kill something. So yes, it is a moral thing. And now that you all have heard that it's a moral thing, you see, now you're stuck. Before you were innocent and naive and just eat meat because it's there and everybody does it, and now you know. So I've just ruined it for you, but that's why the question was asked, I'm sure, so that I would ruin it for all of you. Some vegetarian said, these people need to know. And yeah, it is a moral issue. Now, I should also say that moral issues come in all various sizes. Morality is not white and black. It's not that, you know, there's grades of morality. You know, maybe taking undue advantage of somebody to get your way maybe isn't a moral thing to do, but it's not as immoral as, say, strangling them. You know, there's grades of morality. So here you are, and you're a vegetarian, and you're trying to go through life, and you're traveling, you're doing other things, and it's just really hard to maintain your diet because where you live, everybody only sells meat. You know, you go with your friends to a restaurant, there's nothing served there. You have to drink a glass of water or maybe, you know, do something like that. Well, then try to do it so where your immoral act is lesser rather than greater. So look at the degree of sentience. Maybe if you ate an oyster or a clam or something, it's not quite as much consciousness there, if any consciousness at all. We don't know that, so maybe that'd be better. Fish may be better than a cow, you know, so you can do things like that. And you can say, well, I generally don't eat meat, but sometimes I have to eat, and it's the only thing in my choice. I can't find anything else. And if I did, I haven't had anything to eat. You know, I'm traveling for a week. You can't eat a head of lettuce, you know, every day for a week because that's all you can find. You can't maintain your health that way. It's an unbalanced diet. So don't be a fanatic. Yes, be moral, but you don't have to be a fanatic about it. There's off-whites and grays and really blacks in morality. And you can pick and choose your way through it, you know, as best you can. Still doing the things you have to do. You know, you have a family. So let's say you're the family and you're the one that does the shopping and cooks the food. And your family disagrees with you. They all want steak. And you say, well, that's really not moral. I don't want to go out and just, you know, kill cows for pleasure, so I don't want to do that. But you've got a family, and they disagree with that. So what are you going to do? Say, I'm not going to cook any more meat. You know, if you want to eat meat, go cook it yourself. That's probably not a good idea. You have to also realize that everybody is how they are, growing in the way they do, and you can explain to them that it isn't nice to eat cows, because a cow would like to live its life without somebody killing it. But if they say, nonsense, cows don't care if they're killed or not, you can still live with them, and you can still cook them meat, because that's maybe part of your responsibility is to cook for those people, and you will do that, but you don't really have to cook any for yourself, so maybe you'll buy a little less meat, because there's one less person that you have to feed with it. And if you say, well, if they're eating meat, I'll just eat it too. Well, now you know better, and you're transgressing anyway. Now you get a little black star, see, next to your name. So it's moral choice, like all moral choices, but my point is a lot of people get fanatic about it. A lot of people will be invited to somebody's house for dinner as a guest, and they'll get there and they're serving things and they'll say, I can't eat any of this. You know, what else do you have? That's rude. You say, now which is the greater transition, or the transgression as far as creating entropy in the system? To be rude to your host or to eat whatever they put in front of you? So I would say, be polite in that case. Now there's another whole set of this that you can be, it's interesting, you can be a scavenger, right? You can be a vulture. You can be a coyote, you see, and a scavenger. And what that means is that if it's already dead, you know, then you can eat it. Now, what I mean by already dead is that you didn't cause it to be dead. It's roadkill. There's roadkill lying in the street. Somebody ran over a possum. All right, scoop it up, take it home, and let's eat it. You see, now you're not morally involved in that animal's death. So just the eating of the meat isn't the problem. It's killing the animal is the problem. So what does that mean? That means you go to your office picnic, and your office picnic is serving 2,000 people at your big office, and every year they have this picnic in the spring, and they always serve, you know, barbecued pork or something, and they're going to buy, you know, 200 pounds of barbecued pork because that's what they buy every year, and you're there. Well, whether you eat it or not won't have a bit of difference to any animal being killed. You see, you're just a coyote. You're a vulture there. You can be a scavenger and eat all the meat you want, and it won't have caused another death in the animal kingdom. So then that's okay. There's no moral tag with that. But now there's another side to meat, and that is it healthy to eat? Besides the moral cost, there's this moral issue. There's a health issue. If you look at the China study, where they studied the intake of protein of meat versus disease in a rural Chinese population, and they picked this population. Actually, the study was done by people from the United States. Trying to think where they were from. I think maybe Johns Hopkins, I'm not sure, but they came up with this and they said, where can we find a population that's stable? It's been stable for a long time. They're not going to move around because we need to keep records on these people over like 20 years. And if they move all over and eat all different kinds of stuff and they travel, you know, that's going to mess it up. We need people that are just there and stay there for generations, eat the same kind of food all the time for the next 20 years. Well, they found rural China was the place. And they did this study over 20 years. They kept track of what people ate and what kind of illnesses they had. And their result was that eating meat gives you about the same probability of getting cancer as does smoking cigarettes. In other words, there was a high correlation between cancer and meat consumption. Okay. You know, it's a study. It's statistics, and that's the way that came out. So there is a health issue about eating meat that you have to be concerned about. They also found that if your diet had 20% of its calories or less in meat, there was no bad effect at all. Had no effect. So a little meat wasn't a problem. It's not that meat is toxic, but too much meat, evidently your system doesn't deal with it very well. Probably makes sense. You think of our ancestors, right, for the 2 million years before it came to us, meat's the harder thing to get. Picking berries and bananas and stuff off the ground is a lot easier and more easy to get than catching something because you've got no weapons and no tools. For millions of years where we evolved our physical systems, meat was hard to catch, rare to get, there's no refrigeration. For a long time, there wasn't even any fire. Who wanted to eat raw meat? Well, that's what you needed to stay alive, you would. But, so we went for millions of years probably without even fire to cook it with. And then we had time when we did control fire. We could cook things like that. But meat was probably a minor ingredient. And our bodies probably evolved through these millions of years with a little meat on the side. rather than meat as the main course. They couldn't get a big animal. They killed a big deer and they had lots of meat, but they couldn't all eat it in 2 days. It was rotten. They couldn't use it, you see. So meat was a little problematical. So probably that's why we evolved the way we evolved according to the rule set, was because, you know, we just ate a little meat and that's what our bodies got used to. So evidently a little meat's not a problem. 20% or less of your calories, no statistical significance in the kind of diseases you get. More than that, 30% or 40%, you start to see little increases. And they had people in the survey that traditionally didn't eat meat at all because it was too expensive. Very poor people who just grew things in gardens and didn't have animals. And then they had other people who were much better off, who had their own animals. They had chickens and they had pigs and they had other stuff, and they ate a lot of meat. So they had lots of variation, and it was a very stable population. And that was the real, you can Google the China study and you'll find. The interesting thing about it though, they got this study and they published the results. And they published the results, of course, in the US and other places, because this was the head of the study, though, was some university in the US. And when they published those results, you would expect that, wow, that's going to be, you know, eating meat like we eat meat in the US is like smoking cigarettes as far as cancer goes. Nobody ever heard of it. The China study? What's that? It just fell flat, went away. So it's there. You can study it and you can read the report and all the rest of it, but that's what they found. So that's the second issue. That will help your moral choice, because if your moral choice actually keeps you alive longer and keeps you healthy, then it makes it easier to make. So those are the two issues with meat. What do I eat? I don't eat meat mostly. On this trip, while I'm traveling, yeah, I have some fish, because that's just, it's hard, particularly in Europe. Europe doesn't have a lot of vegetarian in their culture. Mostly in America, if I go in a restaurant, I've got about a 50-50 chance that they'll have 5 or 6 vegetarian selections on the menu. Of course, the menu maybe has 20 things on it, and maybe 5 of those may be vegetarian. But in Europe, that's not the case. Usually, vegetarian is such a minority that nobody pays much attention to it. So it's a little harder here. But, you know, I get by. It's all right if I get a little black star on my name while I'm in Europe. You know, that's okay. I'll work that off. So the point is, don't be a fanatic. Live your life. Make your choices the best you can, but you don't have to, go overboard. Okay, I guess we're ready for the next question.
You want some water?
Well, I'll make it a little. Okay. Kindness and generosity. Somebody who's getting gold stars today.
You were coughing, I said that.
Yeah, thank you.
Une question en français. J'ai un rendez-vous très important. Je mets mon réveil pour être sûr d'être à l'heure. Je me réveille le matin juste avant que le réveil ne sonne. Cette expérience arrive très souvent. C'est une synchronicité. When I have a very important appointment, I set my alarm clock to be sure to wake up on time. And actually what happens is that I wake up just before the alarm rings. Does this experience happen often? Can this be called synchronicity?
Yes, that experience happens often. Almost anybody who wants to set their internal clock to get up, all they have to do is program themselves to do it. And the way you program yourself is you think before you go to bed, I need to get up at 5 o'clock, or whenever the time is. I need to get up by this time. I must wake up at this time. And if you put that intent, your consciousness puts that intent strongly, you will. Right at that time, within a minute or two, pop. Your eyes will pop open and you'll wake up because it's time. It's just, consciousness can do that. It's not that hard to do. Even if you're very tired, you will wake up at that time. It's a matter of programming, really. Fixing it in your mind. If it doesn't work at first, keep trying it and it'll eventually work. So you get stuck where there's no alarm clocks. You can eventually get pretty confident that you'll wake up on time. Of course, if you're worried and you're not confident and you say, oh, I don't want to oversleep, I had to not oversleep, I have to not oversleep, then what you do is you wake up every 2 hours and look at the clock. You see, it's different because now you're putting your intent into not oversleeping and that being a problem and that being a fear as opposed to waking up at the right time. Yeah, how many people in here do that? Program themselves to wake up when they want to. Yeah, see, look at all the hands. Yeah, but half the people. So it's very common.
Et ça marche. Ça marche super bien, monsieur. Even if you change the hour, 6 or 7 or 8.
Sure. Okay, next question.
Quelle est la nature de la conscience? Pure énergie ou autre? What's the nature of consciousness? Pure energy or something else?
Our consciousness is information. It's pure information. Okay? Not pure energy. Energy in a digital reality, energy is a metaphor. Just like there is no light, there is no energy. Okay? We can simulate a ball rolling downhill, and that's gravitational energy, but it's a simulation in a computer. There's really no energy, except in that virtual reality where the ball is rolling down the hill. Then there is. Then whoever's down there, the thing will hit them, and maybe roll over them. There's energy there, but that's simulated. Now, for consciousness itself, in the larger conscious system, we are also digital. Remember, consciousness is an information system. So we're information. And if we're not in a virtual reality, we're information that can't experience. We can't experience, we're just potential. We're data. We're information about all our feelings, all our, what makes us up and makes us unique people, and we're that information, but no virtual reality, there's no experience. So now we're just potential being sitting on a hard drive, if you will, because we're not connected to any data stream. So we, consciousness, individuated units of consciousness, are just information, not energy. Now, what's energy? If we define energy as something that can change something else, and typically that's the way we define energy. The reason we say that ball rolling down the hill has energy is because it can hit something and dent it or break it or roll over it or crush it. It's got the ability to change something. It compacts the earth wherever it rolls as it goes down. It's changing things. It has energy. So that's our basic definition of energy, is something that has the capacity to affect other things, to change things. Well, our consciousness has the ability to change things, right? We can grow, we can play, in this virtual reality, we can interact, we can communicate. So if you want that real general definition, then you could say we're energy, because we can affect change. But we're affecting change inside a digital system. And that ball rolling down the hill in a simulation, hits something and breaks it, and, is energy within that situation. But that may just be a simulation. So it depends on how we define energy. I think it's more straightforward to just say we are information. We're active, we're conscious, we're aware information that can make choices, has the ability to be aware. We're sentient information, not just data in the data, on a data storage someplace. As long as we've got a virtual reality that has rules so we can interact, or some context for our interaction, then we have experience. And there, in that virtual reality, we can do things that make a difference, exhibit the characteristics of energy. But fundamentally, we're information. Now, we get back to the very basics of what about that first cell of consciousness that came into this problem with my assumption. Remember, it comes into this assumption along with free will, along with evolution, and that kind of stuff, along with time, all that stuff comes in. Well, we could say that there's some sort of energy there. It's some kind of potential energy that learns to differentiate two states. You see, we could call that energy, in which case this fundamental thing called consciousness is that energy. But that energy comes from another realm and another reality frame somewhere else that we can't access. So if we want to think of that as energy, then yes, at the root, we're just energy. So it kind of depends on how you look at the problem, the way we use words.
Comment on fait la conscience pour choisir le corps dans lequel elle va s'incarner? How does consciousness do in order to choose into which body it's going to embody itself?
Okay. In this process of transition, if you've been around the block enough, you get to plan on what you're going to do next. And generally, you do that with the help of others who help you in this planning process. And these others, you know, it's that vague others. Who are these others? Well, they are, you can think of them several ways. They're other entities that don't incarnate here, but they have jobs there. They interact and make choices at that level, where we interact and make choices at this level. They're just two different virtual realities. So they've got their job there, we got our job here. It's just entities that have a job and work in different places, making decisions and making choices. So that's one explanation. The other explanation is that they're just NPCs being played by the larger consciousness system. It doesn't really matter. So either way, it's the larger consciousness system, whether it's us or them or NPC or you know, individuated unit of consciousness is all just pieces of the larger consciousness system. However you look at it, it's just a little different flavor, a little different source, perhaps, of the way they come about. Okay, so let's see, what was the question again? Oh, how do we choose? How do we choose our avatar? When we have this conversation with these people and they decide that what it is we need to do, typically what happens is we agree, yeah, we're going to do that, and this is the kind of situation we want, would be best. Okay, and this is all in very general terms. And then somebody says, okay, we've got a spot for you, you know, here, log in and put in this code number. You know, they don't really say that, but you know, it's that kind of a thing. You get an identity, you get matched. So somewhere in this computer system, you and this avatar get connected. And it's not really your choice in the sense that they say, I want to connect to this one or that one, but it's your choice into, yes, here's what I want to learn, these are the kind of things I want, and this is the kind of situation I want, and they say, okay, we can give you that, it's here. So somebody else is actually making the connection of it's here, but you get to decide what it is you want. You know, so it's your free will that says, yes, I want to incarnate, yes, I want this kind of situation, and you can discuss it fairly into detail what the situation is. And then they'll find something that suits, and they may tell you a little about it. Does this work? And you go, yeah, that works as good as anything else. And then you get somewhere in the system, your ID and the ID of that avatar get connected. And then when you have when the free will awareness unit then creates when the individual unit of consciousness creates this free will awareness unit, and it's ready for you to get immersed in that, then that connection's made. And that's then the avatar that you connect with. So that's how it's done. Sometimes there's a life review in the process where they explain to you and point out things to you. If you need to be convinced that you have a particular problem, they'll show you that. That's mainly what it's used for, to convince you, because you don't think you've got this problem, but they think you really do, and you need this sort of thing. And they're not going to override your free will. They're not going to say, well, we know what you need, do this. They're going to have to convince you that this is an issue and that you need to focus on this issue, and this is what would be good. And they're pretty trustworthy, so most people agree, but you don't have to. You have free will through the whole process. Nobody forces you to do anything. But I've found it's always somebody else actually making the connection and knowing what's available and matching it with what you want. Sort of like a real estate agent, right? You go into the real estate agency, I'm looking for a house, it's going to be this big, and I need 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms and whatever. and they go say, well, here's your selection. You know, we got this, this, and this. Which one do you want? Or they may say, here's the perfect one for you, and they connect you to that. They don't say, okay, there's 4,000 houses that are here in the city today. You know, where do you want to start? They don't do that because you don't know all those details. So that's why somebody else does it for you, because somebody that does know those details can make that connection where you don't. That's not your specialty. Somebody else works that problem, and you kind of rely on them to pick the right spot for you. Now, one other thing I might say, since we had a pause back there, I got to make another comment, and that is that sometimes groups will want to incarnate together, or entities will have developed in past relationships that they're really good. They bring out things in each other. They work good as a team. They connect well as a team. And they may decide that we're going to incarnate in some way that we're going to interact. And it may be 2 or 3 or 4 or something that do that, or maybe, you know, and they may be in different parts of the world. They could be, you know, it could be father and son, or mother and daughter, or son and mother, or something, some connection that is particularly valuable for them to work out. And that happens sometimes, where it's a connection that's been planned. And how does that work? Well, there's free will, right? Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes the plan, you know, goes awry. But other times, the system will try to nudge them to connect in the way they need to connect. So if they're in 2 different cities or 2 different parts of the world, somebody will just have an urge to move. They'll just get this sense, I really need to go live there. They're not sure why, but they know that's what they need to do, and then they'll make this connection. So we get nudges and things. It's not that there's no free will, but it's just that we can be nudged fairly easily. Our intuition is another data stream, you see, from the system. So we can get nudged, and that's how that works. So it's not just you alone getting one. Sometimes it's you and others who work well as a team, making connections. But that's only after you, again, I say, been around the block a few times, only after you've been through this process enough that you're into very special considerations of things that you need to learn, and special situations that you might need to learn it. Whereas if you just randomly went back, you may not get the kind of stimulus or the kind of opportunities that you need. So it can be like that. Sometimes you have somebody that will blame some other thing. You know, well, I was poor, that was my problem. You know, I was poor. When you're poor, you're desperate. You do all kinds of awful things. If I were rich, I would have been enlightened, because I would have had all this stuff, and I wouldn't have had to steal. I wouldn't have had to, you know, do all these things. And so the system may just say, okay, here you go. You know, son of a billionaire. There you are. And what they will find out is it didn't have anything to do with money. You see, it was the quality of them on the inside, and next time they come back and say, well, it was because I was poor, you say, well, that doesn't fly anymore. So for all kinds of reasons that people get matched up with situations, there's lots of different reasons, but mostly they're all educational, to help you learn things that you need to learn.